How are you all today? Good to be here. I've never been called a financial outlaw before, but I'm happy to be called that. Usually when I talk about financial things, and I know I'm on tape, so I should be careful what I say, but to my colleagues in law school, they all run from the senior common room when we start talking about synthetic collateralized debt obligations. But we'll do the best we can today, and I will stick to retail examples like student debt. So how many of you have debt? Does anybody have any debt in here? Come on, raise your hand. Are you telling me the people that aren't raising their hands don't have debt? Okay, good. Mortgages, I'm sure you're not going to have too many mortgages. You will have mortgages. Student debt, I'm sure you got student loans, right? Look, I paid off my student loans in my sort of early 40s. I had U.S. student debt, okay? So anybody have any credit cards, for example, right? Could you think that you could go through life, your entire life, in our society without debt? It's impossible, right? You can't possibly live a life in modern societies without some form of debt, right? I mean, debt is so important to everything that we do. I mean, what I write about in my paper and some of my work is about how we need debt actually to lead a decent life. We need access to credit, right, to live a decent life in any society, right? Now, there are two ways to understand debt, and I think both of these ways work in complementary ways. One is the kind of standard way of thinking about debt, which I think is a false way, or at least an incomplete way of understanding debt. This is thinking of debt as a tango between two persons, right? I'm the creditor, you're the borrower, right? You're the debtor, lender, borrower. We have a two-person kind of a thing going on here. We think of it in terms of a matter of contract for all the law students in here. For perhaps some of the for some of the philosophical students in here who are studying moral theory, for example, we might think of paying debts as a matter of virtue, right? But I think we have to sort of go beyond these kinds of concepts of kind of a binary or bipolar relationship between people and think of debt in a different way. Debt is actually also a tale of many tangos, right? In a big tango we'll call society, right? So there's one big tango we have called society. We want to make sure all the other sort of tangos that we have individually or between us and very large financial institutions kind of work in that society and are, fair and sort of sustainable. So let me talk about that. So there are actually two parts to debt. It's a tale of a tango between two parties, but it's also a tale of many tangos. The second thing I want to tell you is that debt also is about two other things. One, if you look at the way financial regulation works, for those of you who are law students, we talk about financial law or financial regulation or the law of debtor-creditor relations, whatever you want to call it. The overriding norm, fundamental norm that exists, remember we had that thing called the financial crisis, right? Where everything went crazy, right? The overriding financial norm after that crisis is financial stability. We want the system to be stable, right? Now the problem with stability is that stability might be just bad for poor people, right? That's the basic problem, because stability lets us kind of aggregate all of our interests together and say, overall, what we need is stability in society, right? So we have this overall goal. But how about how that affects each one of us, each person, right? Because when we start talking about ourselves from a moral perspective, we want to respect each single person, right? And from that perspective, we need to understand debt from the standpoint of what we call egalitarian justice, right? How does it affect me, right? As in terms of my access to credit, giving me access to resources that I need to live a decent life. Now, you might say, well, don't go into debt then. This is your problem, right? It's a matter of choice. But I think choice, we have a false belief about how much choice matters. But let's get started. I want to just kind of give you some backbones before I get on to the question of choice. Here's the kind of dilemma. We face a dilemma when we talk about debt. And here's the dilemma that we face. Debt, too much debt we need debt. So debt is good for us, but we also need to avoid debt because it's bad for us, right? It presents a classic kind of contradiction, right? So how do you get that balance right? So here's a kind of classic kind of setup. I know you guys might get bored with, no, I'm sorry, home mortgages and everything. But think about home mortgages for a second. If you get a home mortgage eventually, when you're ready, that may seem like a lot of money to you. It's not that far away, believe me. I'm sure you'll be fine. You'll be getting bigger mortgages than I will get, right? Let's say the price of your house you buy is, sorry, I have a bad Los Angeles version of house prices, which influences everything. The £400,000 house, right, I'm going to buy, right? And here's the dilemma. Now, this is the magic of leverage, right? Leverage, by the way, underpins almost everything in financial markets. If you understand leverage, you understand how London and Wall Street work, right? Say you get a mortgage of $380,000. That means you have wealth, we call equity, of 20 in the house. Great. You put down an 80%, that's your loan to value ratio. You have an 80% mortgage on the house. That's pretty good, right? Suppose the house goes up by 5% in value because houses fluctuate, right? And it goes up to 420. Your equity has now increased by 100% from 20 to 40,000, right? Now, you might say, well, what's that good? Well, this is about upward social mobility, right? People who own houses, private home ownership in the places like the United Kingdom and the United States are important for household net worth. People that own houses have more net worth than people that don't own houses. That's just a fact of life. I wish it were different, but we have to deal with the way society is, right? So let's suppose instead the house price went down to 380. That's down by 5%. You lost all of your equity in the house, right? Suppose it went down by 10%. You are now underwater, right? Now this what that means is that you're losing money, right? So this is the miracle of and the danger of leverage. Leverage is wonderful on the upside. It's terrible on the downside, right? Now let me go through some case studies with you about that I think you might find interesting about debt. One, I want to talk about Tetzlaff versus Education Credit Management Corporation. This was a case in the United States from someone in his, I think, mid-50s, Mark Tetzlaff, who owed about $260,000 worth of student loan debt. And he was in his late 50s, right? He brought a case, a bankruptcy. He went bankrupt. He went into personal bankruptcy, and he tried to get this debt discharged, right? But U.S. law says that you cannot discharge or get relief from educational debt unless you can prove undue hardship. He couldn't prove it, even though he was unemployed and living with his 85-year-old mother on her pension. He could not prove undue hardship. This is the problem with how debt can impair your life chances, right? There's some other examples we can uncover, for example, from Spain. During the last financial crisis, Spain had a particularly rigid debt system where you were not discharged from mortgages even if you stopped paying on them and went into bankruptcy or an insolvency. People paying debts for life. Look what happened to Greece. Greece is another great example. Employment skyrocketing, homelessness. There was one bakery manager of a big chain of bakeries said, in Spain there will be no more consumers, only beggars, right? Serious problems, right? So debt can be good or it can be really bad. Now, in each of those examples I'm giving you, example of Mark Tetzlaff, the Spanish example, Manolo Marban was his name, who says, I will never own a car, even a car, for the rest of my life because I owe the bank my mortgage. Right? He's a dog groomer in Spain. The example from Greece, debt can have devastating consequences for us. It's an important resource in society to make us better off, or it could make us worse off. So we need to get it right, right? Now, how many of you think, we talked about choice being important. How many of you think you actually make choices in life? Actually, you make very few things you actually do in life have to do with your choices. Life is a series of lotteries. It's a bunch of lotteries, except it's not like your usual lottery because you have no choice but to play, right? You can't stop playing the life lottery. I love this quote from Barry Switzer. He's a former University of Oklahoma football coach and Dallas Cowboys football coach. He said, some people are born on third base and go through life thinking they hit a triple, right? This has been applied to certain people who won presidential elections in the United States with some frequency. So think about that. The birth lottery, where you were born, is really important. About half the variance in incomes that you earn depend on where you were born, which country you're born in, and the income distribution in that country. The parental net worth lottery. Actually, there is a substantial correlation between how much you will earn in your life and how much your parents earn. It's about the same correlation there is for height, right? The education lottery. There's lots of great data on education, right? For example, in the United States, there's data that shows that students in the top, I think, 5 or 1% of the income bracket are 77 times more likely to get into an Ivy League school than kids from the bottom quintile. There's data to show that students with lower standardized test scores who come from higher net worth families have a greater chance of attending and graduating from universities than students with higher standardized test scores. So in a way, kind of merit is a kind of mythology, isn't it? You know. So lots of data on this illusion of choice. So we have to be careful when we talk about choice. We know, for example, we use this sort of data when we talk about, I don't have time to go over it, but you can look at the ACORN data. We get this data when we look at university admissions data. We're always interested in, some of the we can classify postcodes by this data, right? We can actually tell you where people live who are struggling families, difficult circumstances, what the data looks like by postcode. There is a postcode lottery. Now I'm running out of time. So what I want to get at is really to understand how this illusion of choice exists. So how do we want to govern debt? So I argue that we need to look at debt through another lens other than financial stability. We need to look at debt through the standpoint of what we call luck egalitarianism, right? This is a theory that was very well developed in moral philosophy. It comes from a paper by a very famous philosopher named Ronald Dworkin called Equality of Resources. We want to look at choice, and we'll look also at circumstances. And we talk about the distinction in that literature between brute luck and option luck. Option luck is about taking a gamble. Brute luck is about just whatever happens to you that you have no control over, right? Now, I went through the illusion of choice material to just tell you that much of what we choose depends on our circumstances, right? So we don't want the allocation of an important resource like access to credit to be subject to our bad brute luck. So if you look at the structure of debt in society, you want to ask the question, does it comply with these requirements, right? So here's an example. Look at your student debt, right? Right now, student debt is a good example, is based on there are certain provisions which soften that debt, which make it more suitable from the standpoint of egalitarian justice, like income contingent repayment plans and fixed durations for the periods of loans. Obama did the same thing through an executive order, yes, an executive order in the United States, right, that softened the loan. Otherwise, the debt is too rigid and it's unjust from an egalitarian standpoint. And so that is essentially the subject of my, I will skip some of the other finer details given the time we have. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we need to balance debt in the economy from the standpoint of justice, not only from the standpoint of economics or efficiency, because debt is a resource in society, and that resource has to be distributed fairly. So, thanks very much.